Anyway, it's great to be here. It's great to see all of you, a lot of faces that I know, a lot of new faces as well. It's great to see the number of Fijians taking PhD opportunities. I think that's wonderful. And as many of you potentially head into academia, I thought this presentation may be relevant. I'll share my screen and hopefully you can see that. So yes, my practice, my academic practice, I'm here at the Auckland University of Technology, where I'm the acting head of Department of Public Health, and largely involved in determining some of that policies and strategies around how we teach. What I'm interested in is centering practice around the learner, identifying their needs, and as more and more we engage in an online learning environment, to focus on creating a sense of belonging and a sense of engagement in technology-enhanced learning environments. So that's what my presentation will be on today. So prior to COVID, we've had this massive shift where we've moved from teaching in that traditional face-to-face medium to an online medium. And we were largely forced by COVID to go online. And a lot of us, hadn't really thought about online practice, what it meant. Prior to COVID, we were using some sort of learning management system where there was Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, as is commonly used in New Zealand and the Pacific. We were using it more as a repository of information. So we'd store a lot of the lecture materials there, we'd store tutorials. Sometimes there'd be recording, largely there'd be readings on these systems, and that's where students would go and access these information. But as we moved into a COVID era world, we were doing a lot more online. We were engaging with students, we were delivering lectures, and we were using that as the primary mode of learning and teaching. So where to next? We are returning back to campuses now, but all of us would have seen, that there's been a shift. When we talk to our students, they aren't as, when COVID was going on, everyone was in that phase, oh, we miss being on campus, we want to come back on campus. And now that we are returning back on campus, more and more students are saying, no, we don't want to come back to campus in the same way. We want to continue online. It's convenient, I'm working, I've got all of these other commitments. I want to be able to join those classes. I don't want to go back to having to drive, especially in Auckland, where you're stuck in traffic, drive 1 hour to campus, drive another hour back to attend a 1 hour lecture, and 3 hours of my day is gone. So there's been a shift, and there's a lot of factors that are driving change in education. And these are, social, technological, economical, environmental, political. You can read a little bit more about this. It's the Edu Course Report 2022 that has looked into it. But as we return back to campuses in a post-COVID world, we're seeing that there is a demand for hybrid and online learning, and there's a change in the way that we look at online learning as well. There's a demand for skills-based learning and remote work opportunities. So university programs need to respond to these factors. There's also, when we're responding to this, we need to consider, I won't go through all of this, but we will need to consider some of the issues around cybersecurity, about having an online presence and teaching online. We've also got hearing from students around the cost and value of college degrees and how it responds and prepares them for a digital world, a digital economy. And increasingly, we're having conversations around what will our physical campus structures look like? What will those spaces be used for if we are transitioning more and more to this online environment? So we're having those conversations now here at AUT about what is or what will those physical spaces be, you know, and we're talking about how we're going to engage students in those physical spaces, how we're going to engage students in those online spaces as well. And where I come from in terms of engaging students is in the design of an online learning environment. And what I've learned over the course of COVID is, you know, when you have an online learning environment, you need to minimize the clicks. The more clicks you have, the more places that students click here to get here, click again to get somewhere else, click again to get somewhere else. They become confused. They become lost in navigating that online space. When they get, when that online space is not easy to navigate, they become disengaged from the learning, disengaged from that online learning environment. Have a week-by-week approach. Prior to COVID, we were dumping vast amounts of information in separate folders in our learning management system. So, you know, we had a folder for lecture resources, a folder for tutorial resources. And again, students had to click in different folders to get all of the information they needed for that particular week. So flip it around and make it a week-by-week information where the lectures, tutorials, activities, other resources are all contained in that week. Have a visual appearance. Students respond to visual online learning spaces. It engages them. Have a consistent format across the course that will ensure that students find it easy to navigate and they keep up with their engagement. And there is a transition in the role that we play. In a traditional classroom settings, we're in the front of the class. You would normally give a didactic lecture that goes on for an hour, and then students are to ask questions later on. You know, it's moving away from that sage on the stage role to being more of a facilitator. When you're in that online environment, there's a lot of information. So, you know, students can Google anything that you're talking about and have more up-to-date information that you could than what you're speaking about. So we're moving from that traditional role into facilitator role and helping students make sense of that knowledge of all of that information is there. So it's looking back at that constructivism pedagogy. And that brings us to different learning theories. Use learning theories to inform your practice. I focus my practice around different learning theories. So there's a number of learning theories. There's a link there that you can have a look at. I can share these slides as well for you to have a look at these later. But when I have a look at my practice and what's informed my teaching style, it's based around 3 pedagogical principles. So it's that constructive alignment. So it's an alignment between the learning goals of the course and the session resources, the session activities, etc. Then there's the scaffolding of learning. So learners are introduced to knowledge in a piecemeal approach, or they build on that learning each week with each activity, with each resource. And it's and the other pedagogy that I use in my practice is constructivism, and that is where the learner builds on the knowledge that they already have, and they construct their knowledge through engagement with you as a facilitator, with all of the resources and their peers as well. So putting all of this together, I came up with a framework framework for designing engaging technology-enhanced learning environments. Now, what we know all with frameworks are nice, you know, they put together all of this information, but it's hard to translate a framework into practice. So what I did was come up with a template that then enables anyone that's using this framework to translate it into practice. So it's a template that looks at, you know, incorporates scaffolding, constructive alignment, constructivism, as well as those other principles that I've identified in that framework. And what I'll do is I'll go through this template in a little bit more detail. And I'll use examples from a course that I teach as well. So this is a course that I teach. It's called Quality in the Health Sector. And what's important is, as I said, it has a visual approach. And what we do is we put in the key information in an easy to find place for the students. So there's a course overview, teaching team, and how to contact the teaching team and the assessments. And then I have some general information around course schedules, and some forums where they can post questions, and an introduction to the course. And then I have all of my sessions. You can call them weeks, you can call them sessions, you can call them modules as well, depending on how you structure your course and what works well. So that template can be modified according to what you use and the content that you're delivering. So I have each of these sessions, it's 12 sessions. And so when you open up the sessions, that's where the template has been actioned out. So the first part of that template is a banner. And a banner just keeps it fresh. It lets the students know what is the session about, and any other key information. Now, once I have the banner, then I move on to an introduction to the session. And this sets the scene for the student. So it's a very short, crisp introduction. I do it either with a voiceover slide, or I do a video of myself talking about it, and I vary it just to keep it a little bit more engaging. But what I hear back from students is they like the videos, they like seeing me. It gives them a connection to the person rather than just having a voiceover slide, which they don't have as much connection to. So they do like having that. And in this, I use this as a place where I let the students know what is the expectations for the session, what should they cover, and highlight or signal to them or signpost any important assessments, activities that are due in that week. So it's quite short. I won't play all of the videos, but it's just very
Welcome
basic,
to the
very
first
simple.
week of HEAL 704.
It's a couple of
Quality
minutes
management in the health sector.
where I introduce the session.
Kia ora, I'm Jalal
And there's two
Mohammed,
ways
and
I do
welcome
it,
to
as I
session
said.
1, the
So
basics
there
of quality
is,
management.
a video
The aim of
me
this session
or
is
a
for you to develop an understanding of what is meant by quality and
So once I've done that, then the next thing that I present to the students, and this is all in a scroll down page, so the students don't have to click and find all of this information, and I can show you this in a little bit more detail as well, is outline to them the learning goals of the session. How does this session link to the course learning outcomes? By engaging with this session, what knowledge will they develop? And this is, again, for me, it's indicates constructive alignment. So I think about this session, I think about how this relates to that overall learning goals. And then it also signals to me, what sort of resources would I have? What sort of activities would I have? It also develops that scaffolding of learning. So as students progress, they know, okay, learning outcome 1 is in session 1, session 5, session 6, and it builds on learning outcome 1 as they go through those sessions. So it also signposts for the students where particular learning takes place. And when they're coming back and looking at these sessions, they're reviewing it when they're doing their assessments, it's an easy way to find information around a particular learning outcome. Followed by that, I have resources, and these resources could comprise of anything from readings to recorded resources to supplementary resources. So I do have a reading for the students, and readings could be journal articles, it could be newspaper articles, it could be any number, a report, any number of things. I try to limit the readings. I know from engagement with my students that if you put a number of different readings, they're not going to read all of them. So I try and pick the best one that will build their knowledge around a particular area. I try and look for shorter readings because that promotes engagement. If I put up a 30-page reading for that particular week, no one's going to read that. It's off-putting. So I try and find something that is going to be short, crisp, while it builds the knowledge. And then what I do is I record a resource where I talk about the key points or the key concepts from that particular session. And this is a short, under 15-minute video. I like to keep them under 10 minutes. And this builds on the readings and builds on the key concepts in the course. In some sessions, I know some sessions a little bit more, they take a little bit more time and resources to understand the concepts. So I put in some supplementary resources and I say to the students, okay, if you haven't understood the resources if you haven't understood the concepts after going through the readings and the recorded resources, here are some other resources that you can look at. Use this only if you haven't understood, because I don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of resources. And I find that, some students require a little bit more than other students. Right? What I do with the recorded resources is I try and make this as engaging as possible. I want students to look at it because this is where some of the key concepts come in. So, it could be a voiceover slide, it could be a presentation, but more and more, I'm looking at other ways of engaging them. So what I've done is created some recorded resources that are animated. So whilst this take time, I keep them under 10 minutes. And they focus on some key concepts. The downside is they do take a lot of time to create. So, this recorded resource that I'm going to show you took me 3 days to do, and I think it was an under 10-minute video. So it is time consuming. It is time consuming in the first instance because you don't redo these recorded resources. They're generic key concept resources that you can keep using over and over again. Now, when I want to get into some of the detailed conversation, I'll tell you how I do that.
A number of attributes characterize quality of healthcare services. These are access to services, technical competence, equity, effectiveness, efficiency, continuity of care, safety, patient-centeredness, and amenities.
So yeah, this is a short video around a key concept. Now, as I was saying, then I want to build on that key concept. So they've engaged with the readings, they've had a look at the recorded resources, and then it's now time to talk about some of those detailed things, have conversations with those examples, highlight some of the contemporary things that are going on in the field. And this is where I have an engagement session with the students. And it's a 1 to 2 hour session. Because it's online, I have it over Zoom, and there's no lecture delivery in this session. The students come together, they get to talk to me and clarify any questions, any doubts that they had after engaging with the resources. They get to talk to each other and develop that knowledge, so that principle of constructivism. They get to share in that session, and it's just a session for them to develop their understanding a little bit further. Here, I'll also pose some questions to them, get them to think about certain things. So I do that over Zoom. And then what I do after they've engaged with those sessions, those resources and that session, I have a short little activity, and this is something that can be done very quickly. So if I may have discussion boards where I pose a question to the students and say, okay, in 150 words, respond to this question. Once you've responded, post on at least one other classmate's posting, or reply to one of the classmates posting. So it gets them to think about what they want to post in relation to their question, but also they go and read someone else's and comment on that. So it keeps the conversation going. And it's very short, so 150 words as the initial post, maybe 50 to 100 words for the response. So it's not something that is very taxing, because if I make this longer, none of the students' engagement with this resource would not be as high. And then I vary it. So I don't have discussion boards all the time. So I have some peer engagement activities and I have some self-review activities. And the self-review activities could be something as simple as a worksheet, a crossword, online activities, online games, quizzes, etc. So this is something after they've engaged with the resources, they can test their understanding, and it gets them to then it facilitates, them looking at those resources as well if there's an activity attached to it. And this is an example of an activity that I put up. There's just a Word document attached to it, and it's a very basic, worksheet type activity that they do. Now, so if you have a team task, you can also incorporate team tasks into online learning spaces. it is a little bit more challenging. You do need to have more structure around it, having a team agreement that they devise at the beginning of the course that guides how they will engage with each other, how they resolve conflicts, what is the expectations of the team. Having a template for it, I would recommend having a template for a team meetings minute, a very short one, where they document, after they met as a team, what they document, what they've decided and what the next steps of the project will be. I try and embed authentic assessment in my courses. Now that's a little bit more challenging to do on an online environment. So for this course, we have our own clinic, and because it deals with quality, they go and design a client engagement tool for the clinic. And then they talk to clients, they talk to our clinical practitioners, and they devise something or they create something that is very specific to that clinic. And that gets them to apply those theory elements that they learn across each of those sessions. So that becomes a little bit harder to do online. So that's where we're now really getting back into that conversations around post-COVID, what is it going to look like, and really for me, for a lot of people, it looks like a hybrid environment. So even though we've gone back to campus, this course still runs online. The components in the clinic where they go into the clinic to do the authentic assessment still runs, in a traditional face-to-face setting. They come back and we engage in that online engagement space I set aside some time to talk to the teams and get the teams to also talk to each other. So, the first hour is, having a conversation around clarification, doubts, developing their knowledge. The second hour focuses around their team task and developing that team project. So you can incorporate teamwork and authentic assessments into an online environment, components of it, but really there will be components that go in a traditional face-to-face setting as well. And then right at the end of it, now they've engaged with these resources, they've engaged with an engagement session, they've gone out into the clinic, there's quite a bit of information. So it's now time for them to put it together, to start thinking about some of the broader concepts around that session. So I do a very short, 5-minute recap video, just bringing together some of those conversations, tying it into some of the resources, getting them to think more broadly, because until this point, they've been engaging with all of these individual elements, but I want them to go and make those connections between those elements, that resource that they've engaged with, the activity that they've done, the clinic visit that they've done. So putting it all together, and I do this through a recap resource where I bring together all of those conversations and all of the resources. And this is as simple as a voice-over slide that I do.
Kia ora.
And I bring
Before you move on to the next session,
and then at the end, there's a review and checklist, and it could be as simple as something that they tick off to say, what was it that they were expected to do in this session, and have they done it before they move on to the next session? So it links back into that very first video that I did about introducing the course and what is the expectation, introducing the session and what is the expectation of that session. So, that is that framework that I've developed into creating a engaging technology enhanced learning environment. But there are some principles that I want to talk to you about when you do teach online or do you teach in a hybrid mode. Ensure that the workload is realistic. So as I was talking about this framework, I was talking about having bite-sized pieces rather than big activities, big readings, have smaller pieces that the students can go through. Use intrinsic motivation, so having those real world problems, all of that, getting the students to focus around that. I know largely our students are assessment driven, and they think about the assessment before they think about the learning flows. They come into a course and say, okay, what are the assessments? What do I need to do in this course? What do I need to pass? Those are the first initial conversations, and I want to steer them away from that and steer them into learning. So bring, an authentic assessments are quite useful in doing that. Pace learning, scaffold the learning, give feedback. And feedback is quite important to engaging students online. So you may not see students each week in a traditional setting. So you need to build those connections. So feedback is a great way of building connections. So I have lots of formative activities that I also use. I give them feedback. I ensure that it's timely feedback. I have ensure that there is good guidelines around what you want the students to do, and ensure that there's constructive alignment as well. So create an online presence. Now, if you're going to transition into a role from that traditional, sage on the stage to an online facilitator, you need to have an online presence. If you don't have an online presence, the students won't have an online presence. They won't engage with you online. So have some sort of weekly announcements. I post weekly announcements, just welcoming the students to the session, referring them to the resources. Then I have an introduction video, which, as I said, they get to see me, they have some sort of connection. I have that online presence. Have lots of formative activities, give timely feedback and good communication, which will also create your online presence and get students to engage with you online. And make it accessible. We have different learner needs, so learning disabilities, students have a diverse set of needs that we need to accommodate in these sessions. If you don't accommodate the needs of students, they become disengaged. So having that universal, consistent, standard design across those sessions is very useful, using pictures, diagrams, making it visual. Have alt text where you have pictures, because there are students who are visually impaired and they use immersive readers to read out what is on the screen. So having alt text will help visually impaired students. Videos offer flexibility. I've heard from a lot of students that videos are great, in a traditional lecture room, they can't capture everything, they can't write down everything, they can't make notes of everything. Students with English as a second language, struggle even more. So having videos where they can, pause, absorb the information, make their notes, then go back to the videos offers enormous flexibility and improves access to online learning or learning in general. Consider multiple formats and consider access as well. More and more what we're finding is students aren't engaging on a traditional desktop PC or a laptop. They're looking at these resources through their tablet devices, through their phones. So when you're designing these online spaces, make sure that they translate well into a tablet device. Make sure that they translate well into a phone device. And there's lots of ways to do this. A lot of the learning management systems are more intuitive now, and they do these automatically. But think about some of the sizes of the text and some of the image sizes so they translate well. Get feedback. Get feedback from your students. Our university systems are more designed to get feedback at the end of a course, once a course has been completed. That doesn't serve the current students well, because you can't improve on anything if you're only getting feedback at the end. So have some midpoint, or I do at the end of every 4 weeks, I get feedback from the students just to touch base with them, see how it's going, what else they would like, what could improve their learning, and that allows me to pivot and make changes that would benefit the current cohort of students. And be innovative and be creative. Have fun. If you're having fun, with these resources, the students see it, they feel it, and they engage more. Instead of having links, you can use barcodes, and that will get students to go to these places. So you can be creative and innovative like that. And what else came about, as a result, when I was thinking about this, I really wanted to engage with other people. I wanted to particularly engage with the Pacific in terms of, see what is it that we're doing. What I found in our context in New Zealand, there was pockets of innovation going on, but it wasn't widely shared across the university system, which made me also think about, during COVID, what's happening back at home in the Pacific? How are people sharing, the innovative work that they're doing? So I came up with the Pacific Online Learning and Teaching Network. So it was just a space to bring people together to share about online learning and teaching. It was a way for me to give back to the communities, but also engage and learn from them. But it was also a platform for a lot of Pacific people to come together and share the great work that they're doing. And there's some absolutely fantastic work that's been done out there. You know, there's a lot of people at FNU who've doing great work. I remember Pritika's presentation last year where she developed digital literacy tools and created a online game that measured digital literacy, which is fantastic. Teresa's doing a lot of wonderful work. We had Zach, Matthew talked about Zach just a couple of days ago, who is using TikTok for online learning. So there's lots of different things happening out there, and it's great being part of that journey, bringing people together and learning from different people as well. And if you wanted to engage with the network, there's a lot of different ways that you can engage. You can send me an email as well if you want, and I'll add you to the mailing list. Thank you. And that was my presentation. I hope it's been useful. Any questions or any comments?